The TEAMGROUP T-Force Cardea Z44L 1TB is one of the budget M.2 SSDs offered by the TEAMGROUP brand. This SSD is running under the PCIe 4.0x4 interface and is available in 500GB and 1TB storage capacities. This M.2 SSD is aimed towards the budget crowd and it is available for roughly $60 at the time of this review. However, is it any good? The TEAMGROUP T-Force Cardea Z44L is a budget M.2 SSD that uses the PCIe 4.0x4 interface and has rated speeds of 3500MB for the reads and 3000MB for the writes, alongside a good design, fast controller and Toshiba TLC BICS5 memory chips. In addition to those, this M.2 SSD sports a 5-year limited warranty. When we talk about the design of the Cardea Z44L, there isn't much to say really. It's a good looking M.2 SSD and that's about it. It has a blue PCB and a white and black label over the controller and memory chips. However, this label does nothing in terms of thermal conductivity, and that's why TEAMGROUP has included a graphene label in the package of the SSD. This label will aid with the cooling of the SSD, but we shall see more about that later into the review. Speaking of the additional graphene label, this SSD comes with just that, the graphene label. That's the only accessory you will get with the Cardea Z44L, and it's not a bad thing at all, especially considering the price point of this 1TB M.2 SSD. The centerpiece of this SSD is the controller. It's a 5-cent unit with the model number PS5019-EE19-35. This is a dual-core and 4 NAND channel controller which has been launched around 2019, so fairly recent for a memory controller. In fact, this was one of the first affordable PCIe 4.0 controllers to be available for the general public, so seeing it here makes a lot of sense given that this SSD is aimed towards the more low-budget segment of the market. The memory chips of the Cardea Z44L are made by Toshiba and have the model number TA7BG95AYV. These are TLC NAND flash memory chips which are part of the BICS5 series and are built on a 112 layer. The testing platform used for all reviews going forward is based around the Z790 chipset, with a BioStar Z790 Valkyrie motherboard, 64GB of DDR5 Neo Forza RAM and an RTX 3090 Supreme X graphics card. We start our testing with the real-world performance, and this is where things are simple. First, we copy a folder that has a total size of 100GB, and this way we can see how big the cache of the SSD is and how the SSD recovers once the cache is filled up. And here we see that the file copy speed starts off well enough at over 7GB per second, but of course that quickly drops to 2.6GB per second, and as it was expected from an M.2 SSD of this price tag. Nevertheless, the speed remains constant until the cache is filled, and then it slowly drops to 1.4GB per second and finally to 850MB per second. This is when the cache of the SSD is completely filled. Seeing this, we can say for sure that the size of the cache is roughly 60GB, which is not small at all. However, the SSD never really recovers in terms of speed and it fluctuates below 400MB per second until the file transfer is complete. The second test is the same as the first test, but instead of a folder with 100GB of files inside, we have one using only 50GB. And here we get to see that the SSD performs good, starting off at 3GB per second and then slowing down to around 1.4GB per second and stays there with a small dip to 800MB per second at the end of the file transfer. So overall, if you are copying files, keep it under 50GB to get the best out of this SSD. This performance is good for a budget-oriented drive that has no DRAM and uses TLC memory, so far we are looking good. And here you get to see how the T-Force Cardea Z44L 1TB compares to other SSDs. First, we have the 100GB file test where the SSD is on the 5th position, and then here we have the 50GB file size test where the SSD drops to the 3rd last position. Before we head into the synthetic benchmarking, let's see how the SSD performs under load, and by this of course I am talking about the temperatures. With a normal usage, the TEAMGROUP T-Force Cardea Z44L 1TB reached a maximum temperature of 66 degrees Celsius, and this was without the graphene label. However, once the graphene label is installed, the temperature drops by 2 degrees, so not that bad, especially for something that is already included with the SSD. The first synthetic benchmark is the popular Crystal Disk Mark, now at version 8. This is the best software to use to test any storage devices, from SSDs, hard drives, USB flash drives, SD cards, and so on. And in the reading test, we have the T-Force Cardea Z44L behind the T-Force Cardea Z440, not by a small margin though. And when it comes to the reading tests, the SSD loses quite a bit of ground against more modern SSDs. But this was to be expected, as the T-Force Cardea Z44L is a budget SSD after all. The next test is Auto Disk Benchmark, another popular benchmark designed for all types of storage devices. However, this benchmark uses a wider sample of data to test the performance, and here the SSD is on the 5th position and holding a good stand against other M.2 models, even more expensive drives. However, when it comes to the writing speeds, the T-Force Cardea Z44L 1TB is on the 2nd position and moves ahead of the T-Force Cardea Z440. Which is nice. The next and final test uses a video game to see the performance of the SSD, and the game in question is Shadow of the Tomb Raider, a game that has proven to be stable and reliable when it comes to timing the level loading times of each drive. And here the T-Force Cardea Z44L 1TB needed only 18.8 seconds to load the game level, placing the SSD above some sub-rent M.2 SSDs and behind the Neo Forza NFP 075 2TB. The TEAMGROUP T-Force Cardea Z44L 1TB is a budget M.2 SSD that has a good performance out of the box. Also, this SSD does not heat up as bad as other models, especially within the price point. The graphene label does help in lowering the temperatures, even though it's just by a small margin. The performance of this SSD is good. It matches what the competition has to offer in most applications. If there's one thing that is not exactly the best with the Cardea Z44L is the size of the cache. At 1TB of storage capacity, around 16GB of cache is okay, but not the best in the world, especially since when filled, the speed remains low until the end of the operation. But that is one inconvenience that we have to deal with when we're talking about lower priced SSDs that still perform well overall, such as this one. And for its price, $60 by the way, it's definitely a good purchase, as it performs well, does not overheat, and uses high quality components, at least for now. If you like this review, then you might consider subscribing for more, and also if you want to support me in the direct way, then in the description below you'll find the links for both the Patreon and the Subscriber Star pages of this channel.